Death soon was on the wall of Burmum, weaving a mist net as the sun was setting. She had eaten her fill of iguan one of the humans had given her and had a surplus of strand. She was making herself useful, as well as adding to the functions within the human nest. She tapped out her calmness and the fact she was relaxed into the wall. She felt her own mother replying from the woods nearby along an anchor line from one of the other clans. Her eyes, rather than scanning around for threats, were focused on the human male sitting on the dock. It was making the same breathing that Dahlia had made for the quiet creature. She finished up the mist net and moved down the wall. She was quiet and moved in his blind area. Her foot caused a plank to squeak, and Scott looked up at her. He instinctually jerked back before calming himself. "Sorry, I'm sorry," he said, putting a hand up. She didn't understand him and moved slowly, resting down out of reach. "Are you going to try and eat me?" he said, looking her over. She tilted her head and gave a slight bow. He waved her off. "Go away." She scooted a bit closer. He stared at her, meeting her white eyes. "I can fight. Don't try to hurt me," he said, sniffling some. She raised up her upper left arm, reaching toward him slowly. He watched her hand as the tip of her finger touched his face, catching a tear from the tip of his nose. Scott stared at her as she slowly brought the tear into her mandible-laden mouth. That's kind of weird." She watched him for a moment and then scooted back out of reach. She then turned her eyes back out toward the water, with one still focused on him. He nodded and looked back out as well. "They took it away from me," he said. "I'm not even mayor anymore. I got nothing. Turns out not even Lizzie liked me." Scott looked back over at her. "You don't understand me, do you?" She turned a second eye toward him, meeting both of his. "What's your name?" he asked before touching his chest. "I'm Scott Thompson." She looked him over before saying her own name in her own tongue. He listened and shook his head. "I can't even make sense of that." He looked back out at the water and sighed. "I think I'll just get in a boat. That one over there." He pointed at an empty boat docked across the bay. "Take that one. Paddle it out the gate." He looked back at her, smiling. "I still got the opener. I can make it open whenever I want." He laughed a bit before sobbing slightly. "I'll just paddle out, find one of those gators and jump in." He looked down at the water, letting another tear drip down his nose. "They're quick, they say. Snap me in half before I know it." She was next to him in a moment, catching the tear off of his nose. He looked at her, watching as she tasted another of his tears. He smiled a bit. "You're kind of a freak, aren't you?" Death soon watched him, her eyes still wide and whitened. She manipulated her mandibles and tried to speak his language. "Freak," she repeated. Scott smiled, nodding, before reaching over and putting his hand on her knee. He watched her for a moment before she mirrored his action, touching his knee with her lower left hand. He looked her over several times before shaking his head a bit. No, you wouldn't understand. I doubt, nah." He sniffled a bit and took his hand away to wipe a tear from his eye. Death soon reached over, holding his wrist. She then leaned in, opening her mandibles, and extended the manipulator from her mouth, taking the tear in directly. Scott blinked at her for a moment, and then leaned in to try and kiss her. Lizzie led the way to the containers with keys in hand. She walked up to the first and started fiddling with the lock. Bubba leaned in, watching. She paused and looked at him. "You mind? I'll get it open." He smiled and took a step back. "Just watching since they are kinda mine now." She looked around at the retinue with him and then focused on him. "Yes, they may be yours, but I also am your secretary now, Mayor Gumphreys." He laughed. "So you're going to be out here getting things for me often? I figured you'd be busy up at the house typing or something." She sighed, letting the lock go. "That is a stereotype, Bubba." She looked at Dahlia, Gaim, the hideous spider things, and then back at her new boss. "What do you think I need to type? You think the fishermen here have lots of letters going around? You what? You think," she motioned down her body, "just 'cause I wear this little dress, that I am only fit for an office? Well, I didn't mean to offend you, I'm sorry, he said, raising a hand up. She huffed and took a step closer to him. Look, I had my issues with Scott. I don't want issues with you, so I'm making it clear right now. You listening? He nodded. She stared him in the eyes. I work for you, help you, get things done you need done. I, however, don't clean, and I don't like limits put on me. You got that? He thought for a moment. No limits, and you limit yourself against cleaning. He smiled. Got it. She kept staring at him, and then turned back to the lock. It clicked open a moment later. Bubba nodded to her and stepped inside. She reached around and flicked on the light. He paused as his eyes adjusted to the previously dark space, and then looked around at the numerous totes and piles of machinery. Guime walked in behind him and quickly started rooting through the piles. Darkness and Poosdot stepped in next, followed by Dahlia. Dahlia paused at the door, leaning toward Lizzie. What exactly were you banished for? Lizzie leaned closer too and whispered, My real name isn't Lizzie. Nickname the news gave me. Dahlia nodded. Okay. She waited another moment. Not many know this, but I was born on a preserver station. Lizzie thought for a moment. Vat-born? Like no parents? Dahlia shook her head. Not really, no. So, did you get any histories or anything? Dahlia laughed. Yeah, but more Geneline notes, extinctions, world-ending events, stuff along those lines. Nothing human, really. So, all that meant diddly to you. Dahlia nodded. Yeah, I haven't seen any news. This was my first research post. She laughed. First real exposure to people? Humans, that is, you know. Lizzie shrugged and watched the two men looking through the stacks of stuff. Well, Dahlia, humans are shit-tards. Each and every one of us. If we all had power like the wads that rule the systems, we'd end up all banished or dead. Every single one of us. Dahlia looked at Bubba. He's not so bad. Little racist, but he comes around when you need him. Lizzie shook her head. He's a man. Ain't much in the universe worse than them. Traitorous cats, all of them. Fuck you sideways one day, kick you out on your ass the next. Dahlia looked at her and smiled. I like you, Lizzie. You say what you think. Lizzie took a deep breath and shook her head before stepping out of the container. I'll be back at the mayor house, Bubba. Let me know if you need anything, she shouted. Bubba raised up from a pile. Anything but cleaning or limits. Lizzie glared at him and then stepped out of sight. Bubba took a step toward the entrance. The keys? The other containers? They're in the lock, she shouted, out of sight. Bubba got tired of looking through the food, weapons, and tools in the first two containers and moved straight to the fourth. Guime opened the third, intent to catalog everything in order. The light flickered in the fourth, the container being slightly rustier, dingier than the other two. Bubba moved the stacks of boxes, ripping open the securement tape with his pocket knife on the top one. It contained a stack of safety-wrapped data slates. He picked up the first, activating it with his thumb. It had several file folders on the top, the first labeled Survival Strategies. He clicked it open with a swipe, causing it to begin a narration about soil development on xenocarbon-inhabited worlds. He swiped it back off. Could be of use. Bubba tossed it aside and walked through the boxes, stopping to note an unusual container at the bottom of a tall stack. He started moving the pile, picking up poles and crates to shift them away. Once clear, he knelt down, looking at the odd shape. What are you? He asked to no one. Picking it up, he pivoted it in his hands, listening as something shifted inside. Bubba smiled and felt around for a latch. 3 clasps opened at once as his fingers found the first, and the box hissed open. He flopped the top over to reveal a silver sphere as large as his own head. Oh shit, this might be dangerous. He sat it down on the empty path in the middle of the floor and knelt in front of it. He watched it for a moment, moving his shaking finger closer to it. Please don't fuck me up. Please, please. He eased closer, eventually touching his pointer finger to the sphere. Nothing happened. He looked at it for a moment before touching it again, then placed his entire palm on it. Oh, maybe there's something in you. He palmed it with both hands and picked it up, giving it a slight shake. The sphere warmed slightly to the touch before cooling again. Oh shit, I'm irradiated. He dropped it back in the odd-shaped box and slammed it shut. Bubba stood up, looking at his hands as the light flickered. Fuck, the doctor slate. Shit. Gaim was standing at the entrance of the third container when the motion caught his eye. He turned to see Bubba running out of the fourth. Bubba! Bubba waved his hand at them. Gotta run! Don't go in that one! Gaim waved back at him. It's okay. We found the machinery in this one. He smiled and turned back toward the third container, watching as Dahlia was looking over several tanks loaded with robotic arms inside. I got a cart back at the shop. We can get them loaded up and moved. Dahlia peeked out of the container, noticing Bubba running down the street. What's he doing? Dunno, I think he found something good in that one. Says it's his. Dahlia nodded. Think your shop is big enough for all this stuff? Guillaume looked at his personal slate, counting the items. No, barely fit half that one without making the workshop uncomfortable. He looked up at her. I like my shop. Didn't plan for it to be a fabrication station. Dahlia sighed and looked in at all the gear. The rooms I was using in the block. I still have a lease on them. I can set up there. She stepped back in and hollered at Darkness in the back. Gaim is gonna get the cart. I got a place we can move all this to. Get set up. She pointed at Poosdot. You mind keeping a lookout? Make sure nobody jacks anything? Mother Darkness, mind helping me load and move things when he gets back? Darkness bobbed her head up and down. Poosdot mirrored her. Dahlia turned and looked to Gaim. The cart? Gaim looked up from his slate. Oh, yes. Be right back. Dahlia stood and took a deep breath, staring into the container. Gonna be a creator. This is a good thing. Bubba listened to the slate projection of the doctor. He nodded. There's no radiation damage? The doctor mimed, looking at the luminous notes manifested in his small hands. No, there are no signs of radiation damage across all 3 scans. Bubba smiled. I'm okay. You're in good health, but you are carrying a little extra weight. Are you expecting rough times in the coming months? Bubba shook his head. Then you might want to ease back the calories, be more active. Your liver is indicating you are consuming a fair amount of alcohol. You could start there. He groaned. All right. So other than that, clean bill of health? The doctor rolled its eyes and mimed reading again. You are a healthy human adapting well to an alien ecosystem. Nothing of concern at the moment. Bubba smiled and waved his hand to deactivate the doctor, causing the green hologram to disappear. He stood up and walked over to the window of the room, pushing the sheer curtain aside to look out over the main street. Alexandra was a few doors down, talking to a crowd of humans and tall women. People were smiling, food was being shared. This ain't bad at all. He let the curtain fall back in place and went back to the door, exiting and locking it behind him. His footsteps were loud on the stairs, alerting Susie. She hollered from behind the bar. Bubba, you all right? He paused at the bottom of the stairs, nodding at her. Yeah, touched something goofy from the ship. Got worried. It's nothing, though. She laughed. Something goofy? He walked over, looking over the bottles on the wall behind her. Yeah, Wirt stuff. I was just going through it. The AI thing, right? That robot that was running around? He laughed and pointed a bottle of purple liquid. That grape juice? She shook her head. Nah, blueberries. Cynthia has a bunch growing in the greenhouse. It's strong? She shook her head again. No, it's alcohol-free. I use it for mixers. I'd like a glass of it. She smiled, winking at him. On the house, bubs. She turned around and poured him a glass. So, you getting any plans forming? He took the glass of blueberry juice from her and sat down at the bar. No, but everyone else seems to be. He sighed. I don't mind it out there, you know. I like the freedom. And you think you won't be anymore? He looked over at her. People are going to want stuff. Bothering me. I'll have to make plans. Get up when I don't want to get up. Do things I don't want to do. Oh? You mean you'd have responsibilities? Bubba took a sip, nodding. Yeah. Alexandra is starting to show, you know. He chuckled. Even hotter now. Susie leaned on the bar in front of him. I've been keeping her drinks clean. A woman carrying shouldn't be getting liquored up, you know. His eyes widened. We were wondering about that. He looked back down at his purple juice. We don't really know much about it. I mean, I got that doctor slate and we're hoping that'll teach us some stuff, but we're pretty ignorant. Susie stood up straight and grabbed the bottle to give him another pour. It is what it is. We're thrown to the wild out here on our own for the most part. Bubba looked up at her. I don't like that. It's wrong, you know. They should help us out. Susie laughed as she poured. They? You're the one in charge, Bubs. Maybe you should look into it. Bubba laughed as she lifted the bottle back. He lifted the glass up and started standing. You're right, Susie. I should probably go see what all Scott had going on up the hill. She winked at him. Bring the glass back when you can. He started toward the door and was opening it when she spoke up again. No, I voted for you, Bubs. You're going to do great. He laughed and stepped back out onto the street. Bubba went up the steps and walked through the door of the mayoral office building. He paused, tapping his foot on the stone floor. He looked down and admired the triangular patterns made with the gray and white stones. They did a pretty good job, he said, nodding. He made it upstairs and into the mayor's office, pausing to note the large blue-green stain on the floor. He leaned down and sniffed it. Ugh. He stood back up, looking around. Yeah, guess I gotta get to work. He strolled around the upper floor of the vestibule, looking in rooms as he passed them. One had a large table hewn from one of the spiky trees with matching light purple chairs. The next was full of furniture covered in sheets with a layer of dust on top of them. He walked in, pulling off a sheet revealing plastic-wrapped boxes of sweet cookies. Damn, how old are these? Bubba leaned over, looking for any labeling. Nothing. Where did these even come from? He picked up a box and tore it open. Inside were dozens of individual wrapped caramel chocolate-covered cookies. He sniffed it and took a bite, nodding his head back and forth as he let the taste hit him. Not bad. He left the room of sheets and continued his stroll, looking around. 3 more rooms were in a row, leading off to the back wall of the building. He paused at the window and looked out over the wall and the forest beyond while he took another bite of the cookie. I like this view better, he said, nodding to himself. He finished the cookie while looking out at the woods before continuing on. He made his way back into the vestibule overlook and paused next to a door he hadn't noticed. He swung it open and found the supply closet. He smiled at the mop and bucket before pulling it out. Bubba filled the bucket up in the bathroom off of the mayor's office and threw in some soap he had found in one of the piles in the sheet room. He scrubbed at the blue-green spot until the floor shined. He smiled when he was done, and then noticed how the clean spot stood out against a rest of the grimy floor. Bubba mopped his office until it sparkled in the afternoon light from the window. He stood in the doorway admiring it, and then turned around. He then noticed how grimy the rest of the building's floors were. He sighed to himself and got back to mopping. It was dark before he finished. Wore out, he went back upstairs and grabbed 2 more of the caramel chocolate cookies. He was munching on them when he sat down at his new desk and propped his feet up. Bubba took another bite while he looked over the desk. He popped open the upper drawer, perusing the insides. He found the basic office supplies, a data slate, and then he found a transit relay in the back. Fucking hello. He tapped it, causing it to illuminate the controls in front of him. He looked over the capability modules, news, sports, game shows, and then he stopped when he found the dialer. He tapped it, pulling up a singular outward transmission path. He sat thinking for a moment before nodding to himself again. Fuck it, he said before tapping it. It blinked as it tried to connect to the other end. A moment later, a man appeared. Hello? The glowing image asked. Hi. Who are you? The man asked. Bubba raised his hand up slightly. I just got elected mayor. Bubba Gumfries. The man groaned. Figures. Thompson was a nepo hire. Well, you were duly elected. Bubba nodded. And sorry, but who are you? Senator Stevens. I'll look into you. See what I can to make you official. He shook his head slightly. It's late here, pardon, I'm just waking up. I get that. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just cleaning around here, taking a look around. It's okay. It's a relief hearing I won't have to deal with him anymore. Stevens shifted in the viewer as he got comfortable. So, did you execute him? Was it violent? Bubba shook his head, half chuckling. No, well, I don't think so. I just woke up and found out I'm the new mayor. Bubba shifted in his chair, thinking. Shit, I better find out. I don't know what happened to him. Bubba shifted again. Hell, he had a bad night last night, and with today, he's kinda cleaned out. Stevens leaned in closer, whispering. Hey, I don't care if it's violent. I'm just saying. Just make it quick and don't let him talk. You get me? What? Bubba asked. He raised his hand up. Look, I can help. I can hook you up with drops, get you supplies. Just make sure he doesn't say anything. Can I count on you? Bubba laughed. I don't need anything. Hell, I don't even want to be mayor, bud. He lifted the cookie up. You where all this shit came from? Stevens shut his eyes for a moment, pinching his forehead. What do you want, Mr. Gumfries? Bubba thought for a moment. Negotiate some sentences, probably. These folks here are pretty all right. I figure some of them have done enough time, maybe get a ride out of here. Reintegrate, you know? Stevens looked at him, staring. Each and every one of you were deemed a threat. You are where you are supposed to be. All of us? Threats worthy of banishment? Hell, all I did was owe money. That ain't a big deal. Stevens typed on a slate out of view and then read off what he found. Says here you accrued a large gambling debt, went on a drunken bender in which you started preaching about debt forgiveness in the Viridian district, and started a riot that lasted for 3 weeks. Is that correct? Bubba nodded slowly, biting on his upper lip. Yeah, that sounds about like what happened. 40 people died during that event. You became a meme. Stevens looked at Bubba and sighed. Yeah, everyone there is there for a reason. What about my wife, Alexandra? She's a nobody, just whoring, you know? Whoring on Winthrop. She's lucky she wasn't quartered. Bubba was still nodded. Okay, he said, lifting his finger up. What about my secretary, Lizzie? She's a tiny gal, city, you know? She's not made for a fringe world. What'd she do, corporate white crimes or something? Come on, we've got to have a few I can negotiate, right? Stevens sighed. Bubba, I'm seeing why they voted you in. You've got a good heart, but no. Each and every one of you is there for a reason. Her especially. Look, if you don't want the carrot, I get it. I can just as easily have a rock knocked onto an intercept with that little town you guys are in. Start all over. I don't give a shit. Just don't let that idiot talk. Just make it quick. Disappear him for me, and I'll let you keep your precious townfolk that you seem to care about. Bubba groaned. Hell, it seems you're the only one on the outside that can communicate with us. Who's he going to talk to, that matters. Stevens stared at him for another moment. Make sure he doesn't talk. I'm not joking about the space rocks. Morals kept the civilized from killing you, but no one will bat an eyelash if you were smote by a cosmic event. Really? Bubba glared back. Senator Stevens nodded before terminating the call. Bubba sighed, leaning back in his chair. Being mayor sucks.